What's up, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be covering a book called Splitting. And this book is by Billy. And this book is by Bill Eddy, who's an attorney, mediator, and clinical social worker. And it's also with Randy Kreger, who is the co-author of Stop Walking on Eggshells as it relates to borderline personality disorder. And this is the subtitle of this book is The Legal and Psychological Advice You Need for Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Before we get started with this video, make sure to check out the description to this video for ways to support me. There's a link to buy me a coffee in this video in the description. And buy me a coffee is a way you can donate to me. It's a simple way, it just uses PayPal, but it's really simple. One coffee equals $1. And if you can't do that and you want to get this book, use an Amazon affiliate link that's in the description, and that way I can get a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the book. And that's just a couple of ways that you can help me out so that I can continue doing this in the future. And this is a very specific book for people going through divorce. But when I was going through it, I was going through it with somebody that was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And if you've ever dealt with somebody with borderline personality disorder, you know how difficult it can be to be in a relationship with them, but also just dealing with them with interactions. And going through a divorce is even more difficult. And I remember the first time I bought this book. I remember the time I bought this book, I was panicked because I had so much fear going forward with divorce. It's one of the toughest decisions of my life and one of the most fearful times of my life because there's so many things involved in divorce, splitting assets and what to do with that, and the fallout and the destruction of your life, the potential destruction, especially with somebody with borderline. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. Obviously, any divorce is going to be difficult, but with the borderline person, it's even scarier. And same thing with narcissism. If you're in a relationship with somebody with narcissism, and the main reason I bought this book was because I didn't know what to expect. I had never been through a divorce before. I had never been in the legal process, the court process before. So I didn't know what to expect, and I was hoping this book would really help me. In retrospect, it's not that helpful of a book. I feel like there's other books out there you could probably get better. My recommendation would be, I'll give my recommendations a little bit later, but for now, let's get into the book. So the beginning of the book, it just talks about BPD, borderline personality disorder, and the treatment for borderline personality disorder, which is the DBT therapy, which is dialectical-based therapy. It's this very intricate type of therapy, group therapy, that people with borderline personality have to get. And if you want to get the other book by this author, the Stop Walking on Eggshells, that book is extremely popular and very well known. And it means you don't have to walk on eggshells if you're in a relationship with somebody with borderline personality disorder. And that provides steps of how to manage the relationship if you are going to stay in it. And it talks about narcissistic personality disorder too, this book. And it says NPD comes from insecure personal attachment. And obviously if you're going through this with somebody with narcissism, it's going to be extremely difficult. And then the next chapter that I have some notes about is chapter 3, which talks about blamers and targets. It's all your fault. And the thing with splitting from somebody with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, they're going to have a sense of loss, of abandonment. So just asking for a divorce is going to even make that worse. And it tells you to take care of your physical safety. One of the biggest things of this book is the adversarial court system. The way of the court system set up is it puts people against each other, and that kind of ramps up the bad situation when you deal with somebody with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, because it puts you against each other and then it forces you to fight it out. So it just escalates the conflicts that you're likely to encounter when you get a divorce. And it also increases the chances, this book says, of a high conflict divorce, which is what I ended up having. That's kind of the reasons reason it took me a while to ask for a divorce. I probably wouldn't have done it without the help of a therapist, but because I knew it was going to be high conflict. You have to know that's going to happen and just be ready for it. And if you think a book is going to completely help you deal with that, it's not. And this book is very generic, so it's just not going to help as much as you think it might. It might help you feel better about your decision in some aspects, but it's not going to give you a step-by-step approach. And it says, another thing in the book that I wrote down is that you will be blamed. Of course, you're going to be blamed. And it says that a blamer presents a false persona in court. This happened to me, and this will probably happen to you, where they pretend to be somebody else. They, of course, pretend to be the victim. If you're dealing with somebody with borderline personality disorder, you probably already know this. They're probably constantly the victim, so you're just going to have to deal with that more when you're going through your divorce. And chapter 4 of this book is called Managing a Blamer with an Assertive Approach. And this chapter is about don't walk on eggshells. And if you take a back seat, it'll put you in a bad spot. And that's something I can definitely attest to. I was trying to be assertive in the beginning, but I was not assertive by any means as it relates to a divorce. You should be very assertive, be more aggressive, I would say, in the beginning. Try to settle for more than you initially think is right, because you're going to end up retracting, going backwards. So be very assertive. This book talks about start documenting right away, think strategically, not reactively. And as far as documentation, I don't know if that would help in my perspective. Follow this person's advice if you want to, but you can document all you want, but most divorces are really related to settlements. They don't go all the way to court. But if you think you're going to go to court with jury trial, then maybe you should start the documentation, especially if there's accusations. If there's going to be accusations of domestic violence and other things like that, then you should start documenting. If there's custody battles that are going to come, make sure you document stuff related to that. But just going overboard, I would not do. Pulling a bunch of documents about how this person's a terrible person is not really going to help. The court doesn't want to hear it. So just know that, because at the beginning, I thought I was going to have to, put together a case myself, and a case of why I deserved X amount. It's not really that way when you go through a divorce. It's more of, you're more likely to deal with settlement. And I'm going through an estate thing too, and that's similar as well, where it's not really documenting a bunch of things. It's more of getting the facts, or getting the financial situation, and then getting to a settlement. And another thing this says is don't have emotional responses, and be careful what you email. And I would agree with that. Make sure you don't email the person you're getting a divorce from without talking to your lawyer. And your lawyer is probably going to be expensive, so you don't want to spend a bunch of time emailing them either. You just want to be very conservative as far as communications. And chapter 5 is preparing for a court battle with a blamer. And the main thing I got from this chapter is getting a therapist and keeping a journal. And you need to notify law enforcement in case you run into those domestic violence situations. But I think that getting a therapist is key. Getting through a divorce by yourself is pretty tough. You're going to probably blame yourself, but you're just going to be questioning everything. You're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel like the world's crushing in on you. So getting a therapist and keeping a journal is a way to track your thoughts and make sure you're not becoming overly negative on yourself. And then chapter 6 is today's divorce court culture. This is just an overview of divorce court, which will help a little bit, but I felt like my experience with divorce court and the divorce process there's a lot more that the author could have provided. But you can't really, what he says here is you can't really use mental health stuff in a no conflict divorce, because most divorce cases are non-fault divorce. So you can't really bring up the person's mental health and say, this is why I'm getting a divorce, and use that against them, or use that to get more assets. That's just not going to work. So don't think that that's a way to approach your divorce. And then chapter 7, this is about hiring a lawyer who understands. And the advice they give here is to make sure your lawyer has experience in court, is easy to communicate with, and understands difficult personalities in family court cases. There's also things in here about like hiring a lawyer that has experience in this area. I tried to do that, but none of them really have experience in this area, or they say they've dealt with difficult personalities and they know what to do. This part, hiring a lawyer, is going to be the hardest, and you should interview multiple lawyers. But what you really need to do with lawyers is ask them their billing process, how much they ask for retainer, how much their hourly rate is, how they communicate, and how responsive they are. Because the things that I've dealt with my divorce lawyer and the state lawyer is communication. Lawyers aren't the best at communicating, and all these family lawyers know each other, so they kind of work together, and in my view they extend the cases longer than they need to. But you don't want to be dealing with a lawyer that's not really communicative or checks in on you. I have a lawyer right now for the estate stuff that doesn't check in, and that's not ideal. You want to ask them, be really thorough in asking about how your lawyer communicates and how often they communicate. If they don't have a good response, then just be aware it's going to be hard working with them, because that means they just wait until you email them. And that's how both of my lawyers were, and that's just something to, I think the most important thing is communication, and then billing and how long they think the case will take. You should also ask about that, because if they are just general and they don't have any idea, then that means that they just plan to extend your case as long as possible. And another thing that I would try to find, if you can, is a lawyer that's good at negotiation, because it's tough when you have to work through the whole settlement yourself and they don't have any negotiation skills. Like most of these lawyers, all they do is they collect your data and they keep it in case you go to court. But in the meantime, they just wait for you and the other party to settle. And I know people are out there are going to be like, maybe you just had a bad experience with lawyers, but I interviewed multiple lawyers in both the divorce and estate case, and I've run into the same situation. I think it's just the nature of the way these lawyers work. And a lot of these lawyers are from small offices, so they might not know the best processes of how to communicate with clients, how to be diligent, and they forget a lot. So you have to keep a lot of your own documents that you have, whether that's marriage certificate, death certificate, things like that for, estate case. But you have to keep all that stuff and have it ready for them, because they're probably going to ask for it over and over again since they have many cases. And that's something else this book said, is that a lot of these lawyers have 50 to 100 cases going at once. So that's something to realize. And another thing I would say about the lawyer part is expect to pay at least $10,000 if you're going to have any kind of adversarial divorce. It's really easy to go through $10,000 in any kind of case at all, because the way the lawyers bill their hours, especially at the beginning, because they pretend to do a lot, in my perspective, that they're reading about your case, they're going through documents. When they start that process, and actually like the filing process, so everything filing is at the beginning of the case, and then you blow through $10,000 pretty easy, because this book was very generic. When you Google how much a divorce costs, it's very generic, but I would say at least $10,000 is something to think about. And I mean, that was the most useful data that I wrote down about this book, because I don't think the rest of this information in this book was necessarily useful. And I think that's my overall review for this book, is that if you're looking to this book to learn how to perfectly deal with somebody with borderline personality disorder or perfectly deal with the divorce, you're not going to get either. It's going to be a mix of both, and it's very generic. And after finishing my divorce, I still don't think this book was missing so much information that I thought could have been useful. It got into it has like all these charts in there that were just not realistic on how a divorce goes. It was very specific in like if you go to a court or a trial, but you don't really need to know that part on how to settle a case. The main thing this book should have focused on is hiring a lawyer, how the lawyers work, and then how to get to a settlement the fastest. Because I think that's the best case scenario in a divorce, is getting to a settlement the fastest. But if you're going through borderline personality disorder divorce, I understand how crazy it is, and you want to feel better. And if you want to feel better and have enough money for this book, then you might as well get it. There's a couple of useful, peaceful information in here. Maybe get Stop Walking on Eggshells as well. But overall, this book isn't the best for going through a divorce with borderline personality. It's not going to solve all your issues if you're going through that. And same thing with narcissism. It's not going to help with that either. So that's my review for this book. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video if you liked my summary, even though I didn't like this book. But even then, like the video, and thanks for watching.